Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world where the night sky held secrets that could make your skin crawl, where the moon wasn't just a pretty orb in the darkness, but a potent, sometimes malevolent, force. Imagine yourself, wrapped in coarse wool, the biting chill of a medieval night seeping through the cracks in your wattle and daub hut. You're huddled by a sputtering fire, its meager light dancing on the rough-hewn walls, and outside, the moon, full and gleaming like a polished silver disk, casts long, eerie shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the thatched roof, sends a shiver down your spine. You pull your blanket tighter, eyes wide, because you feel that the moon isn't just looking at you, it's doing something to you. Its light isn't just illuminating the darkness. It's penetrating your very being, messing with your humors, stirring up the deepest, strangest fears. You probably won't survive this if you were actually there, to be honest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling chatty, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always cool to see how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In this dimly lit, pre-scientific age, the world was a tapestry woven with threads of observation, superstition, and a healthy dose of fear. You see, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to prickle the inky blackness, a different kind of light took over, the moonlight. And this wasn't just any light. For the medieval mind, it was imbued with a profound, almost magical power. Think about it. You lived in a world without electric streetlights, without flashlights, without the constant hum of technology. The moon was your primary nocturnal illumination, and its cyclical nature, waxing, waning, appearing, disappearing, was a constant, undeniable presence. It was a rhythm that governed the tides, the growth of plants, and, so they believed, the very essence of human existence. The ancient fear of moonlight's strange effects on the human body wasn't just some fringe idea whispered around campfires. It was a deeply ingrained belief, a fundamental truth of their lived experience. You might scoff now, lying in your cozy bed with your phone screen illuminating your face, but imagine the visceral reality of relying on the moon for visibility, while simultaneously believing it could steal your sanity, curse your crops, or even turn you into a beast. It's a bit like believing your Wi-Fi signal could spontaneously turn you into a frog, but, way more terrifying because frogs don't usually eat people. One of the most pervasive fears was the idea that direct moonlight could somehow corrupt the humors. Medieval medicine, as you probably know, was heavily based on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were considered tangible fluids within your body, and their balance was absolutely crucial for your health. A healthy person had these humors in perfect equilibrium, flowing harmoniously. But a sniffle, a fever, or a sudden fit of rage could all be attributed to an imbalance. So, how did moonlight fit into this? Well, it was thought to be inherently cold and damp. Think about how the night air feels compared to the warmth of the day. This cold and dampness, it was believed, could disturb the delicate balance of your internal fluids. If too much cold from the moon seeped into you, it might increase your phlegm, making you sluggish, drowsy, or even prone to catarrh, which is a fancy medieval word for snotty nose, basically. Or it could chill your blood, making you susceptible to fevers or chills. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was a physical interaction, a transfer of properties from the lunar light to your very being. You might find yourself shivering, even indoors, and instantly attribute it to a mischievous moonbeam that had found its way through a crack in the wall. This fear wasn't confined to just making you a bit chilly. It extended to far more serious afflictions. Historians still argue whether the concept of moonstruck was solely metaphorical or if there were genuine physiological observations misinterpreted through the lens of humoral theory. Were some people truly more susceptible to illness during certain moon phases, perhaps due to environmental factors they couldn't grasp, and the moon simply got the blame? Consider the common medieval ailment of dropsy, a condition characterized by severe swelling due to fluid retention. While we now understand it as a symptom of underlying kidney or heart issues, Back then, it was often associated with an excess of cold and damp humors. And what was the ultimate source of cold and damp in the night? The moon, of course. So, if you woke up with swollen ankles, your mind might immediately jump to the conclusion that you had foolishly allowed too much moonlight to fall upon you during your sleep. It's like blaming your flat tire on the exact moment the mailman drove by, rather than the nail you ran over. Convenient, if not entirely accurate. This isn't to say medieval people were entirely without observation. They did notice patterns. They saw how the tides rose and fell with the moon, how crops grew differently depending on the moon's phase, and how some individuals seemed to behave more erratically during the full moon. These observations, stripped of a scientific framework, were then interpreted through the prevailing lens of magic and superstition. The moon became an active agent in their lives, not just a passive reflector of sunlight. You can imagine the constant vigilance. If you had to relieve yourself outside in the middle of the night, you wouldn't just stroll out nonchalantly. You'd probably pull your cowl low, avoid looking directly at the moon, and get your business done as quickly as possible, scurrying back inside to the relative safety of your dark hovel. Even carrying a torch might not feel like enough protection, as the moon's influence was thought to be subtle, pervasive, and capable of slipping through any unguarded crevice. It was a bit like trying to avoid getting a tan by standing in the shade, but instead of a tan, you might get a case of the moon sickness. This fear wasn't just for the uneducated peasant, either. Even those with a bit more learning, the early scholars and physicians, grappled with these concepts. They didn't have microscopes or germ theory. They had Galen, Hippocrates, and a world where the supernatural was interwoven with the natural. So, for them, understanding the moon's influence was as crucial as understanding the properties of herbs or the temperaments of their patients. It was a complex, often terrifying, dance between what they saw and what they believed. As you continue your journey through the medieval night, the fear of the moon grows even more potent when its glow is linked to something truly unsettling: lunacy. You might have heard the word before, perhaps in an old movie or a dusty book, but for the medieval mind, lunacy wasn't just a quaint term for madness. It was a literal, tangible condition directly caused by the moon, from luna, the Latin word for moon. Imagine someone you know, perhaps a normally quiet neighbor, suddenly shouting at shadows, tearing at their clothes, or succumbing to violent fits. In our time, you'd think of mental illness, perhaps a neurological condition. But then, you'd point to the sky, to that glowing orb, and whisper, "The moon has taken them." This belief that lunar cycles were directly responsible for mental instability was incredibly widespread and deeply ingrained. It wasn't just a folk tale. It was a common explanation for behaviors that defied understanding. When someone exhibited erratic or violent tendencies, especially if these episodes seemed to coincide with the full moon, it confirmed what everyone already knew. The moon, in its full glory, was believed to exert a stronger pull, not just on the tides, but on the very fluids within your brain, causing a disturbance, a tempest in the mind. Think about the sheer helplessness. If your loved one was afflicted by lunacy, what could you do? There were no psychiatrists, no medications, no understanding of complex brain chemistry. All you had was the undeniable evidence of the moon's cyclical presence and the undeniable reality of their erratic behavior. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? To be at the mercy of something so vast, so distant, yet so seemingly powerful over your inner world. It's like finding out your internet addiction is actually caused by the Wi-Fi router itself, not the content you're consuming. No, wait, that's not quite right. It's more like believing the router injects chaotic thoughts directly into your brain. Yes, much worse. The concept wasn't entirely without some observational basis, however flawed. While we now know that the moon doesn't cause mental illness, disruptions to sleep cycles during brightly moonlit nights could certainly exacerbate existing conditions or contribute to heightened agitation in susceptible individuals. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep in a drafty, poorly lit room when the full moon is beaming through every crack, turning your small space into a ghostly stage. Lack of restful sleep, especially for those already struggling with their mental state, can absolutely lead to irritability, disorientation, and even hallucinations. For the medieval person, These observed correlations were simply proof positive of the moon's direct influence. One mainstream historical fact to consider here is the widespread practice of housing those deemed lunatic in asylums or monastic institutions. While these places varied greatly in their approach, many were influenced by the prevailing theories of the time, including lunar causation. Records from institutions like Bedlam, St. Mary Bethlehem Hospital in London, though later infamous for their harsh conditions, reflect a period where patients were often treated with methods believed to counteract lunar influences, perhaps kept in darkened rooms, or subjected to various purges to rebalance their humors. It wasn't always malice. It was often a desperate attempt to deal with something they didn't understand, using the only explanatory frameworks available to them. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this is the medieval belief in lunatics having enhanced strength. It was often reported that during their fits, individuals afflicted by lunacy would display unnatural power, able to break bonds or overcome several people. This could be attributed to the fever or frenzy induced by the moon's influence, suggesting a temporary, almost supernatural, empowerment. You might hear whispers in the village about the blacksmith's son, usually meek, who during a full moon fit, lifted a cart that normally took 2 men. Of course, adrenaline and panic strength are real phenomena, but for them, it was just further proof of the moon's mysterious and terrifying effects. Historians still argue whether the medieval understanding of lunacy hindered or inadvertently assisted early medical observation. On one hand, attributing everything to the moon prevented deeper scientific inquiry into the brain. On the other hand, the very act of observing and trying to explain these behaviors, even if incorrectly, was a precursor to future psychological and neurological studies. Did the moon theory provide a comforting, if inaccurate, framework, or did it merely perpetuate a harmful stigma against those suffering from mental illness? It's a debate that touches on the very nature of progress in human understanding. You, living in this age, would instinctively protect anyone showing signs of such affliction. Windows would be covered, direct moonlight avoided at all costs. You might even tie a small bag of protective herbs around their neck, hoping to ward off the moon's insidious reach. Perhaps you'd even try to keep them awake during the full moon, thinking that sleep under its rays was the most dangerous time, though, of course, sleep deprivation would only make things worse. It's a tragic irony, really trying to help someone by actions that might unknowingly cause more harm. Imagine trying to fix a complex piece of electronics by just hitting it with a hammer, because you once saw a blacksmith do something similar to a broken plowshare. It makes sense in a medieval kind of way if you don't think about it too hard. The fear of lunar madness wasn't just about the occasional violent outburst. It also encompassed more subtle forms of mental disturbance, like profound melancholy or extreme emotional swings. If you found yourself sinking into a deep sadness for no apparent reason, or if your emotions were as volatile as a stormy sea, the moon might be blamed. The melancholic humor, associated with black bile, was thought to be particularly susceptible to the moon's cold and damp influence, leading to states of profound despair. It was a convenient explanation, saving you the trouble of introspection or trying to find other causes for your woes. Just blame the big white cheese in the sky. This pervasive belief about lunacy underscores a fundamental difference between your modern world and the medieval one. You live in a world where explanations, even for complex phenomena, are sought through scientific inquiry. They lived in a world where the unknown was explained by forces seen and unseen, where the celestial bodies were active participants in human fate. The moon, so beautiful and serene from your comfortable vantage point, was for them a source of profound dread, a harbinger of potential madness. And as the night deepens, you can almost feel its cold light seeping into your very bones, whispering unsettling thoughts into the corners of your mind. As the pale moonlight streams through the gaps in your shutters, you feel a subtle shift within you, a faint chill that has nothing to do with the external temperature. This sensation, for the medieval person, wasn't just imagination. It was the tangible evidence of the moon's influence on the humoral balance within your body. Remember those 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile? They weren't just theoretical. They were thought to be deeply connected to your health, temperament, and even your susceptibility to illness. And the moon, that ever-present nocturnal giant, was believed to be a major player in keeping them in check, or more often, knocking them out of whack. In the intricate tapestry of medieval medicine, each humor was associated with specific qualities and elements. Blood was hot and wet, linked to air. Phlegm was cold and wet, tied to water. Yellow bile was hot and dry, associated with fire. And black bile was cold and dry, connected to earth. Health was a harmonious dance of these for a perfect equilibrium. But the moon, with its inherent cold and damp nature, was seen as a disruptive force, particularly to the warmer, drier humors, and a magnifier of the colder, wetter ones. Imagine yourself feeling unusually sluggish or melancholic during a long stretch of moonlit nights. You'd likely attribute it to an excess of phlegm or black bile, both considered cold and damp. The moon, by its very presence, was thought to be actively increasing these humors within you, cooling your internal fires and dampening your spirits. It was like trying to keep a campfire roaring while someone keeps pouring cold water on it. You can almost feel the vitality draining from you, replaced by a heavy lassitude. Conversely, conditions associated with heat and dryness, like fevers or sudden rages, often linked to an excess of yellow bile, might be seen as less prevalent under strong moonlight, or at least the moon wouldn't be the direct cause. It's a system of interconnectedness where every natural phenomenon had a specific, understandable, to them, impact on the human body. It's like a medieval medical app, but instead of tracking your steps, it tracked the moon phases and told you why you felt grumpy. A mainstream historical fact here is that this humoral theory, primarily derived from ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and later refined by Galen, formed the absolute bedrock of medieval medical practice across Europe. Every diagnosis, every treatment, from bloodletting to herbal remedies, was based on manipulating these humors. So, when a physician in the 14th century looked at a patient, they weren't just looking at symptoms. They were trying to decipher which humor was out of balance and often what celestial body might be influencing it. The moon's role in this was rarely questioned. It was an accepted truth, much like the existence of gravity is for you today. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief that certain moon phases were more dangerous for specific humors. For instance, the full moon, being at its most potent, was thought to draw humors to the surface, making one more susceptible to external influences. A waxing moon might increase blood and phlegm as it grew, leading to a feeling of fullness or even congestion. A waning moon, by contrast, might cause humors to recede, leading to weakness or depletion. So, not only did the moon affect you, but its phase determined precisely how it affected you. It's like your mood ring not just changing color, but predicting which limb will go numb based on the lunar calendar. Historians still argue whether the detailed adherence to humoral theory and its integration with astrological and lunar beliefs stifled genuine medical progress or provided a necessary, albeit incorrect, framework for doctors to even begin observing the body. Did the comprehensive nature of the theory, which accounted for almost everything, prevent medieval practitioners from looking for alternative explanations? Or was it simply the best possible system given the limited tools and knowledge of the era? It's a classic chicken or egg scenario in the history of science. You, living in this time, wouldn't just worry about catching a cold from a draft. You'd worry about catching a chill from the moon. If you woke up feeling unusually lethargic, your first thought might be, too much moonlight last night. My phlegm is surely overflowing. You might then try to counteract this by consuming hot foods, like spiced wine or peppery broths, to warm your internal humors. Or you might wrap yourself in extra layers, even indoors, trying to create a barrier against the moon's cold penetration. This extends beyond just feeling ill. Your temperament was also believed to be influenced by your dominant humor, and thus indirectly by the moon. If you were naturally sanguine, full of blood, optimistic, the moon might make you a bit more phlegmatic, calm, perhaps too calm. If you were naturally choleric, full of yellow bile, prone to anger, the moon's dampness might temper your fiery disposition, making you feel irritable rather than outright furious. Every aspect of your being, it seemed, was subtly manipulated by the celestial dance above. So, as you drift deeper into the medieval mindset, you understand that the moon isn't just an object of beauty or wonder. It's a key player in your personal health, a cosmic force constantly nudging your internal chemistry. You can almost feel the faint, cold luminescence trying to seep through your skin, attempting to rebalance or unbalance the delicate mixture of fluids within. It's a reminder that in this world, every external force had a direct, visceral impact on your internal reality. And in the silent medieval night, the moon was perhaps the most influential, and certainly the most mysterious of them all. As you try to settle into a restless sleep, the thought of the moon's subtle influence on your internal humors is unsettling. But then, a sudden, warm trickle beneath your nostril jolts you awake. You reach up, and your fingers come away sticky and crimson. A nosebleed. For you, it might be a minor inconvenience, perhaps a sign of dry air or a bumped nose. For the medieval person, however, a spontaneous nosebleed was far more than that. It was a mysterious signal, an omen, a potential harbinger of something significant, often ominous. In a world where every bodily function was imbued with meaning, a nosebleed wasn't just a physical event. It was a communication from within or perhaps from forces beyond. The sudden rush of blood, especially without apparent cause, was considered deeply significant. It was blood, after all, the very essence of life, spilling forth unbidden. This made it a potent sign, often interpreted through the lens of humoral theory and, naturally, its connection to the moon. You might instinctively dab at it with the corner of your rough tunic, but your mind would race. Was it an excess of blood, a plethora as they called it, needing to be purged? Or was it something more sinister? The location of the bleed also mattered. A bleed from the right nostril might signify one thing, perhaps a minor imbalance, while a bleed from the left, closer to the heart, could be seen as a more serious warning. It was a bit like trying to read tea leaves, but with your own bodily fluids. One mainstream historical fact is that prognostication through bodily signs was a common and accepted practice in medieval medicine. Physicians and common folk alike looked for cues in urine color, sweat, fever patterns, and yes, even nosebleeds, to predict the course of an illness or to understand a patient's internal state. These observations, while lacking modern scientific rigor, formed the basis of their diagnostic efforts. A doctor might spend considerable time examining a nosebleed, not just stopping it, but interpreting its flow, color, and timing. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to nosebleeds was the belief that a sudden nosebleed, particularly during a full moon, could be a sign of impending passion or strong emotion. It was thought that the moon's gravitational pull, combined with its cold and damp nature, could draw blood to the head, causing it to burst forth when emotions ran high. So, if you found yourself arguing fiercely with a neighbor and then suddenly started bleeding from your nose, it wouldn't just be embarrassment. It would be seen as undeniable proof of your intense feelings, perhaps even a sign that your temper was dangerously overheating your humors. It's like your body's built-in emotional barometer, but instead of just showing you a red face, it makes a mess. Historians still argue whether the focus on such specific, seemingly minor, bodily signs distracted medieval physicians from more systemic approaches to health, or if these detailed observations, however misinterpreted, laid foundational groundwork for a more thorough examination of physiological symptoms. Did this microanalysis of bodily effluvia prevent them from seeing the bigger picture, or did it train them in meticulous observation, even if the conclusions drawn were often erroneous? The moon's role in this was often subtle but significant. Given the moon's association with cold and dampness, and its perceived influence on fluids, a nosebleed might be interpreted as the body's attempt to expel an excess of blood humor that had been agitated or drawn upwards by lunar forces. If the moon was full and bright, its power was at its peak, and any resulting nosebleed could be seen as a direct consequence of this heightened lunar influence. You'd quickly try to recall if you had been sleeping with your face exposed to the moonbeams, or if you had spent too long under its baleful gaze. You might find yourself applying various folk remedies to stop the flow, beyond just pinching your nose. Perhaps a cold key placed at the back of your neck, or a charm whispered over a piece of cloth pressed to your nostril. These weren't just about stopping the bleed. They were also attempts to counteract the unseen forces that had caused it. Every action you took had a dual purpose, practical and spiritual. A sustained or recurring nosebleed, especially, could evoke deep fear. It wasn't just a nuisance. It could be a sign of a more serious internal imbalance, perhaps even a weakening of the life force itself. If such a thing happened to you, your family might quickly seek out a local wise woman or even the village physician, desperate for an interpretation and a remedy that would address not just the symptom, but the cosmic forces at play. You'd be less worried about needing a tissue and more worried about your soul escaping through your nostrils. The medieval mind truly lived in a world saturated with meaning, where the natural and supernatural were seamlessly interwoven. A nosebleed, seemingly mundane to you, was a dramatic pronouncement from your own body, whispered perhaps by the moon itself. And as you wipe away the last traces of red, the subtle chill in the air and the faint glow from the window make you wonder what other secrets your body might reveal under the silent watch of the night sky. The lingering metallic taste of blood from your recent nosebleed is a stark reminder of the strange forces at play in this medieval night. But it's not just your internal fluids you worry about. As you glance towards the window, the moon, now a little higher, seems to intensify its glow, and you remember the pervasive, chilling belief that moonbeams themselves could cause sickness and decay. This wasn't just a metaphor. It was a deeply held conviction that the very light of the moon was imbued with harmful properties. Imagine living in a world where direct sunlight was known for its warmth and life-giving properties, but its nocturnal counterpart, the moon, was suspected of doing the exact opposite. People believed moonbeams could literally rot food, spoil meat, and even cause plants to wither. If you left a piece of freshly baked bread on your windowsill overnight, exposed to the moon's pale light, you wouldn't be surprised to find it covered in mold by morning. This wasn't just spoilage. It was the moon's insidious touch, accelerating decay. It's a bit like believing your fridge light causes your food to go bad faster, but with cosmic consequences. This belief extended directly to the human body. It was thought that if you were exposed to moonbeams, particularly while sleeping, the cold and damp essence of the moonlight would seep into your flesh, causing various ailments. Skin might become pallid, muscles might weaken, and eyes could become inflamed. It was a subtle, insidious attack, making you vulnerable to disease, weakening your constitution, and literally moonstriking you. You wouldn't just get a sunburn. You'd get a moonburn, a decay that worked from the inside out. A mainstream historical fact here is the common practice of covering food and water containers at night. While this certainly had practical benefits in keeping out pests and preventing contamination, the underlying medieval rationale often included protection from lunar influence. People didn't just cover their well. They sometimes placed a lid on it even if it was just a bucket of water drawn for drinking, specifically to prevent the moon from tainting it. This shows how deeply embedded the belief was in daily routines, a silent acknowledgement of the moon's perceived danger. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief that moonbeams could cause temporary paralysis or a feeling of being hag-ridden. If you woke up feeling stiff, unable to move for a moment, or with a sense of crushing weight on your chest, it was often attributed to moon-induced paralysis. This wasn't just a dream. It was the moon's cold touch locking your limbs. Of course, we now understand sleep paralysis, but for them, it was the moon playing a cruel trick, sometimes even with a shadowy figure of a hag or demon seen in the peripheral vision, an embodiment of the moon's sinister influence. It's like waking up with pins and needles, but convinced it's because the moon stole your ability to wiggle your toes. Historians still argue whether the widespread fear of moon-induced decay spurred early, albeit primitive, forms of food preservation, or if these practices were already in place and simply attributed to lunar influence. Did the belief in moon rot accidentally lead to better hygiene? Or was it just another layer of superstition draped over existing practical methods? The exact interplay between folk belief and accidental innovation remains a subject of fascinating debate. You would, therefore, take great pains to shield yourself and your family from direct moonlight. Curtains, if you were fortunate enough to have them, would be drawn tight. If not, blankets or animal hides would be tacked over windows and doorways. Even the smallest crack that let in a sliver of lunar light was considered a potential conduit for illness. Sleeping with your face turned away from the window, or even pulling your blanket over your head, wasn't just for warmth. It was a defensive maneuver against the insidious moonbeams. The fear wasn't just about physical decay. It also extended to mental dullness. It was believed that prolonged exposure to moonlight, especially on the head, could make one slow-witted or forgetful. The brain, being a moist organ, was thought to be particularly susceptible to the moon's dampening effect, making thoughts cloudy and memory foggy. So, If you found yourself struggling to recall a simple task, you might chastise yourself for having been careless with moon exposure. This deep-seated apprehension highlights how every element of the natural world, in the medieval view, had a dual nature, benevolent or malevolent. The sun was unequivocally good, a source of light, warmth, and growth. The moon, however, was ambiguous. It provided light in the darkness, a comforting presence for travelers, but it also held this darker, decaying aspect. It was a constant reminder that even beauty could harbor danger. As you pull your blanket tighter, ensuring not even a sliver of the moon's cold light touches your skin, you can almost feel the presence of unseen forces at play. The air itself seems heavier, imbued with the moon's chilling essence. And in this pervasive medieval fear, you realize that true darkness wasn't just the absence of light, but the presence of a light that could literally, and terrifyingly, rot you from the inside out. The very thought of moonbeams causing decay leaves you feeling vulnerable, but the medieval fear of the moon reached its terrifying peak when it came to sleeping under the moon. This wasn't merely about feeling a bit chilly or getting a nosebleed. It was about the profound dangers medieval people associated with moonlit slumber, a time when your body was believed to be most open to external influences, most susceptible to the moon's insidious touch. Imagine trying to sleep in a small, drafty room. You might be exhausted from a day of arduous labor, but the bright moonlight streaming through a gap in the roof or a chink in the wall keeps you on edge. Every medieval person knew that to sleep directly under the moon's gaze was to invite misfortune, illness, or even madness. Your body, relaxed and unconscious, was considered to be a porous vessel, easily infiltrated by the cold, damp, and potentially corrupting essence of lunar light. It's like leaving your door unlocked in a bad neighborhood, but the burglar is made of light and causes internal organ failure. The most common and terrifying consequence believed to stem from moonlit sleep was paralysis or a general feeling of being struck by the moon. You might wake up stiff, unable to move your limbs for a moment, or feel an inexplicable weakness in your muscles. This wasn't just poor circulation from sleeping in an awkward position. It was the moon literally leeching the strength from your body. This fear was so pervasive that many people would go to extreme lengths to ensure no direct moonlight fell upon them while they slept. Blankets would be pulled over heads, makeshift screens fashioned, and even the direction of one's bed might be carefully considered to avoid the moon's path. A mainstream historical fact reinforcing this fear is the widespread use of bed curtains or canopies, even in homes that were otherwise quite modest. While some might have been for warmth or privacy, their primary purpose in many instances was protection from night air and, crucially, from moonlight. These weren't just decorative elements. They were essential pieces of defensive architecture against the perceived nocturnal hazards, with the moon being a prime suspect. You wouldn't think twice about installing blackout blinds today, but imagine if the consequence of not having them was actual physical harm. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this is the belief that sleeping under the full moon could make one prone to vivid, disturbing nightmares or even prophetic dreams. The moon, with its ethereal and otherworldly glow, was thought to open a conduit between the waking world and the realm of spirits or subconscious fears. So, if you woke up from a particularly unsettling nightmare, drenched in sweat, you might not just dismiss it as a bad dream. You'd immediately blame the full moon, convinced it had allowed dark entities or unsettling visions to invade your slumber. It's like blaming your weird dreams on your Wi-Fi signal being too strong and letting creepy internet content sneak into your subconscious. Historians still argue whether the consistent warnings against sleeping under the moon, ingrained in medieval folklore, inadvertently contributed to better sleep hygiene by encouraging people to sleep in darker, more shielded environments, or if these superstitions simply added unnecessary anxiety to the already challenging act of getting rest in a pre-industrial world. Did the fear of lunar exposure lead to practical, if accidentally beneficial, habits, or was it just another layer of needless dread? You would find yourself instinctively pulling your sleeping mat away from any window or gap in the wall. If you had children, you'd be even more vigilant, ensuring their faces were covered, or that their cradles were positioned in the darkest corner of the room. The last thing any parent wanted was their child to be moonstruck, to wake up sickly or worse, with signs of lunacy. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about survival and protection. The fear also extended to the idea that the moon could draw out your bodily fluids if you slept uncovered. This tied back to the humoral theory, the moon's cold and damp essence drawing out your vital warmth and moisture, leaving you depleted and vulnerable. You might wake up feeling inexplicably parched, or with your mouth dry, and attribute it directly to the moon having sucked your moisture away during the night. It's like leaving a sponge out in the sun. But the sun is the moon and the sponge is your precious bodily fluids. Even animals were believed to be susceptible. People would cover their livestock, or ensure that their barns offered sufficient protection from moonlight, fearing that moonbeams could cause cows to yield sour milk, or hens to stop laying eggs. This shows the holistic nature of the belief system. If it could affect humans, it could certainly affect the animals crucial to their survival. So, as the silent hours of the medieval night wear on, and the moon traverses the sky, its light seems to press against your dwelling, seeking entry. You might shift restlessly, your mind still buzzing with the day's anxieties and the pervasive fear of the unseen. To close your eyes is to surrender to vulnerability, to open yourself to the insidious chill of the moon. And in that deep, historical darkness, the most profound peace you could hope for was a slumber untouched by the pale, dangerous light from above. With the fear of moonstruck slumber still fresh in your mind, you naturally turn your thoughts to defense. In the medieval world, where unseen forces were as real as the calloused hands that tilled the soil, protection wasn't just about locking your door. It was about warding off malevolent influences, and against the pervasive threat of lunar malevolence, people relied heavily on protective charms and rituals. These weren't just superstitions for the simple-minded. They were deeply ingrained practices, woven into the fabric of daily life, offering a sense of agency against a mysterious, powerful sky. Imagine yourself, before settling down for the night, taking a small, gnarled piece of rowan wood and placing it carefully on your windowsill. Or perhaps tying a tiny pouch filled with dried St. John's wort or mistletoe above your bed. These weren't mere decorations. They were potent talismans, imbued with properties believed to repel the moon's harmful energies. The belief was that certain plants, stones, or even specific symbols carried a natural or divine power that could create a barrier, deflecting the cold, damp, or maddening influence of the lunar rays. It's like having a medieval anti-moon malware program running in your house. These charms often derive their power from long-held folklore, passed down through generations. A specific knot tied in a cord, a particular incantation whispered over a fresh sprig of vervain, or a piece of red thread tied around a child's wrist each had its specific purpose and was believed to offer a specific kind of protection. The effectiveness wasn't based on scientific proof, but on faith and tradition. A mainstream historical fact is the pervasive use of apotropaic devices in medieval Europe. These were objects or symbols intended to ward off evil. Think of gargoyles on cathedrals, often grotesque figures designed to scare away demons, or horseshoe hung above doorways. Charms against the moon were simply another facet of this broader cultural tendency to protect oneself and one's property from perceived spiritual or magical threats. This wasn't just individual superstition. It was a societal norm, often supported by religious practices or adapted into them. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief in using objects that reflected the sun's light as a countercharm against the moon. For instance, polished silver mirrors or even bits of shiny metal were sometimes hung where moonlight might fall, with the idea that they would reflect away the moon's ill effects, almost like a spiritual shield. Some might even try to capture sunlight in water during the day, believing that drinking this solarized water at night could strengthen them against lunar assaults. It's like believing you can fight fire, but with light, and your stomach is the battleground. Historians still argue whether the reliance on charms and rituals hindered the development of more practical approaches to health and safety, or if they provided essential psychological comfort and a sense of control in a world where real control was often scarce. Did the belief in charms prevent people from seeking more effective medical solutions? Or did it allow them to cope with inexplicable phenomena until such solutions became available? It's a debate about the role of belief systems in human resilience. You, like everyone else, would have your own preferred methods. Perhaps you carry a small, polished stone in your pocket, one said to be imbued with protective energies against lunar-induced nosebleeds. Or you might carefully sweep your doorway at dusk, scattering salt or blessed ash, believing it forms an invisible barrier against anything malevolent that the night and its moon might bring. The feeling of performing these rituals, however simple, would bring a profound sense of security, a feeling that you were not entirely at the mercy of the unseen. These protective measures weren't just for individuals. Whole villages might participate in communal rituals, perhaps on a night of a particularly bright full moon, to collectively ward off lunar dangers. Bonfires might be lit, not just for light and warmth, but to burn away any lingering negative influences, symbolically cleansing the air of moon-borne maladies. The community aspect added another layer of reassurance. You weren't facing these fears alone. The choice of specific charms was often tied to the perceived nature of the threat. If the moon was thought to cause mental instability, herbs associated with calming or purifying properties would be used. If it was thought to cause physical decay, something resilient and life-affirming, like specific woods or iron, might be chosen. Each charm was a carefully selected piece of a larger puzzle, an attempt to use the natural world to counteract the perceived threats of the supernatural. So, as the night deepens and the moon continues its silent journey across the heavens, you feel a faint sense of calm, knowing you've done what you can. The small, worn charm in your hand, the herbs tucked under your pillow, the tightly drawn curtains, they are your bulwark against the vast, mysterious power of the moon. In this medieval world, protection wasn't a guarantee, but every charm, every ritual, was a quiet prayer for safety, a whispered hope for an undisturbed night. Despite your carefully placed protective charms, the medieval world offers another layer of lunar apprehension. The intricate dance between the moon and the stars, specifically how astrological charts dictated moon-related health precautions. For you, astrology might be a fun distraction, a quick glance at your horoscope over coffee. But for medieval people, it was a profound scientific and philosophical system, deeply intertwined with medicine, agriculture, and daily life. The position of the moon, relative to the zodiac and other planets, wasn't just a matter of cosmic alignment. It was a direct instruction manual for your well-being. Imagine a learned scholar, hunched over a parchment scroll, painstakingly calculating the exact positions of celestial bodies. They weren't just predicting fortunes. They were determining the most auspicious, or most dangerous, times for everything from planting crops to performing surgery, all heavily influenced by the moon. Each sign of the zodiac and each planet was associated with specific parts of the body, and when the moon was in a certain sign, it was believed to exert a stronger, often more volatile, influence on that corresponding body part. So, if the moon was transiting through, say, Aries, which governed the head, then that period would be deemed particularly dangerous for skull injuries, headaches, or even nosebleeds. You wouldn't just worry about bumping your head. You'd worry about bumping it when the moon was specifically trying to mess with your head. It's like having a traffic report for your body parts, but instead of avoiding rush hour, you're avoiding celestial alignments. A mainstream historical fact here is the significant role of astrology in medieval medical education and practice. Many medieval physicians were also trained in astrology, considering it an essential diagnostic tool. They would consult ephemerides, tables showing the positions of celestial bodies, before performing procedures like bloodletting or administering certain remedies. The University of Paris, for example, had strong astrological components in its medical curriculum. This wasn't some fringe belief, it was part of the established medical canon. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief in critical days determined by the moon's position. These were specific days during an illness when a crisis, either a turn for the better or worse, was most likely to occur, often linked to the moon's transit through certain signs or its aspects to other planets. A physician might confidently predict, your fever will break on the third day, for the moon enters Libra then, and their patients would believe them wholeheartedly, not just because of the doctor's wisdom, but because of the moon's undeniable cosmic decree. It's like your doctor telling you your cold will peak on Tuesday because that's when the moon is in your sign, rather than just saying, it's a virus. Historians still argue whether the integration of astrology into medicine, despite its lack of scientific basis, encouraged a holistic view of the patient by considering environmental and cosmic factors, or if it simply muddled genuine medical observation with unprovable celestial influences. Did it provide a comprehensive, albeit flawed, framework for understanding illness, or did it merely introduce a layer of pseudoscience that ultimately impeded rational inquiry? You, as a medieval individual, would be acutely aware of these astrological timings, especially if you felt unwell. Before a journey, before undertaking a major task, or certainly before any medical intervention, you or your family might consult a local astrologer or a learned priest to ascertain the moon's favorable or unfavorable position. It wasn't about defying fate. It was about aligning yourself with cosmic energies, trying to work with the moon rather than against its powerful current. The fear of lunar influence was particularly potent during eclipses. A lunar eclipse, when the moon appeared to be devoured or darkened, was often interpreted as a sign of great misfortune, a period when the moon's malevolent energies were unleashed without restraint. People might stay indoors, perform special prayers, or wear extra protective charms during an eclipse, fearing illness, madness, or even natural disasters, all amplified by the moon's compromised state. This system of astrological precaution provided a sense of order in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. While it might seem overly deterministic to you, for them it offered a map, a guide to navigating the complex influences of the cosmos on their earthly lives. The moon, therefore, wasn't just a physical object. It was a celestial beacon, broadcasting health warnings and dictates across the night sky. And you, living under its gaze, were constantly listening, constantly adjusting your life according to its silent, powerful commands. With the celestial map of astrological precautions firmly imprinted on your medieval mind, you come to understand that the moon's influence wasn't just about passive emanations. It actively dictated medical procedures, none more ubiquitous and seemingly vital than bloodletting. For you, the idea of intentionally draining blood from a sick person might seem archaic, even barbaric. But for the medieval physician, and indeed for you, the patient, it was a fundamental, often life-saving intervention, and the moon's phases were absolutely crucial to its timing. Imagine yourself feeling feverish, your head throbbing, your humors clearly out of whack. The village physician arrives, not just with his bag of herbs, but perhaps with a small astrological chart, or at least a mental reckoning of the moon's current phase. He wouldn't simply cut you open. The very timing of the incision, the amount of blood to be let, and even the specific vein to be opened were all intricately linked to the lunar cycle. This wasn't guesswork. It was perceived as a precise, scientifically, for their time, informed process. The rationale was rooted deeply in humoral theory. Blood was one of the four humors, and an excess of it, a plethora, was often blamed for various ailments, from fevers to headaches to, yes, nosebleeds. Bloodletting was the primary method to restore balance, to literally drain away the excess. But the moon, with its powerful pull on fluids, was believed to either aid or hinder this process. Specifically, the waxing moon, when it's growing fuller, was generally considered a less favorable time for bloodletting. The belief was that as the moon increased in size and light, it caused bodily fluids, including blood, to rise or swell, much like the tides. To cut a vein during this phase was thought to be more dangerous, risking excessive bleeding or making the purge less effective as the humors were already in an agitated, rising state. It's like trying to bail out a leaky boat while the tide is coming in. You could do it, but it's a lot harder and riskier. Conversely, the waning moon, when it's shrinking towards a new moon, was considered the most propitious time for bloodletting. As the moon diminished, it was believed to cause bodily fluids to recede or settle, making the process of drawing off excess humor safer and more effective. The body was more receptive to being purged. If you were truly ill, you might have to wait days, enduring your symptoms, until the moon was in the right phase for the physician to proceed. This waiting period wasn't seen as delay. It was seen as responsible, moon-aligned care. A mainstream historical fact is the sheer prevalence of bloodletting as a standard medical treatment for almost every conceivable ailment throughout the medieval period and well into the early modern era. Whether you had a fever, a cough, gout, or even an emotional disturbance, bloodletting was often the first and sometimes only recourse. The average person might undergo several bloodlettings in their lifetime, making the lunar timing of these procedures a matter of common knowledge and acute personal relevance. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this is the specific belief that when the moon was in the sign of Gemini, bloodletting from the arms was considered particularly effective, as Gemini ruled the arms and shoulders. If the moon was in Cancer, associated with the chest, then a bloodletting from a vein in the foot might be performed to draw humors away from the afflicted area. This demonstrates the incredible granularity of these astrological beliefs, merging the celestial with specific bodily regions and medical interventions. It's like having a celestial GPS telling you exactly where to find the best vein for a therapeutic leak. Historians still argue whether the strict adherence to lunar and astrological timings for bloodletting sometimes led to worse patient outcomes by delaying necessary treatment, or if the ritualized nature of the timing provided a psychological benefit to patients who believed deeply in its efficacy. Did waiting for the right moon phase inadvertently allow some conditions to worsen? Or did the placebo effect of belief in a cosmic alignment offer a genuine, if unquantifiable, form of healing? You, as a patient, would undoubtedly feel a mix of apprehension and hope as the physician prepared his phlegm or lancet. Your trust wouldn't just be in his skill, but in his knowledge of the heavens. If the moon was not in the optimal phase, you might even plead with him to wait, fearing the consequences of an ill-timed purge. The act of bloodletting itself, with its visible release of blood, would feel like a tangible expulsion of illness, a physical rebalancing of your internal world, guided by the silent power of the moon. So, as you imagine the sharp glint of a physician's blade under the pale light of a waning moon, you understand that even the most invasive medical procedures were not simply empirical acts. They were profoundly influenced by a cosmic calendar, a testament to the medieval belief that your body was not an isolated entity, but a miniature universe, constantly in dialogue with the vast, mysterious forces of the night sky. The unsettling thought of deliberate bloodletting, timed by the moon, highlights the deep fear and respect medieval people held for the lunar sphere. But the moon's influence stretched far beyond bodily fluids and surgical interventions. As the night deepens and the shadows lengthen, your mind turns to the truly terrifying, primal fear of transformation. Specifically, the legendary connection between the full moon and werewolves. This isn't just a children's tale for the medieval mind. It's a very real, very present danger. Imagine a moonlit night, not unlike this one, but steeped in far greater dread. A lone traveler, caught on a forest path, hears a distant howl, unlike any wolf they know. The full moon hangs heavy and bright above the trees, illuminating the path with an eerie, silver glow. Every rustle in the undergrowth sends a jolt of terror through them, because in this world, the full moon doesn't just illuminate the path. It transforms men into beasts. The legend of the werewolf, from Old English werewolf, man-wolf, was incredibly potent in medieval Europe. It wasn't just a monster lurking in the shadows. It was a human being, a neighbor perhaps, cursed or afflicted, who, under the specific influence of the full moon, would shed their humanity and take on the form of a ravenous, powerful wolf. This transformation was inherently linked to the moon's peak power, its most intense manifestation. The full moon was seen as the catalyst, the cosmic trigger that unlocked the beast within. A mainstream historical fact is the widespread belief in shapeshifting across many cultures, with the werewolf being a particularly prominent manifestation in Europe during the medieval period. Trials for witchcraft and lycanthropy, the supposed ability to transform into a wolf, were not uncommon, especially from the late medieval period into the early modern. People genuinely believed in these transformations, and accusations of lycanthropy could lead to horrific consequences for the accused. This wasn't just folklore. It was part of their legal and social reality. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the medieval theory that lycanthropy could be caused by a specific type of melancholia, an excess of black bile, which made individuals prone to delusions and violent urges, especially during lunar cycles. Some medical texts of the time even described treatments for this disease, attempting to cure the affected individual of their delusion, sometimes through purges or specific herbal remedies. So, while it was often seen as a demonic affliction, there was also a fascinating, albeit flawed, attempt to medicalize it, linking it back to the moon's influence on the humors. It's like doctors trying to cure your werewolf problem with a laxative and a strong cup of tea. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of werewolf legends was a symptom of the social anxieties of the time, fear of the wilderness, of external threats, or of internal human brutality, or if they were genuinely believed reports of individuals suffering from undiagnosed mental illnesses or conditions like hypertrichosis, excessive hair growth, exacerbated by social panic. Did the werewolf legends provide a convenient scapegoat for unexplained violence? Or were they a genuine attempt to explain terrifying, inexplicable phenomena in a pre-scientific age? You, in the medieval night, would certainly take precautions. Staying indoors during the full moon was paramount, especially if you lived near dense forests or had heard rumors of strange disappearances. Doors would be barred, windows shuttered tight. You wouldn't just be afraid of thieves. You'd be afraid of a monstrous creature that was once human, driven to savagery by the silent glow of the moon. The fear wasn't just external. There was also the horrifying possibility that you yourself or someone you loved might be afflicted. Perhaps a strange dream after a full moon, a sudden surge of uncharacteristic anger, or an unusual craving for raw meat, gross, I know, might send a chill down your spine, making you wonder if the moon's curse was beginning to take hold. It's the ultimate reality check for your medieval existence. You probably wouldn't survive being bitten by a werewolf. This profound fear of lunar transformation underscores the medieval perception of the moon as a powerful, transformative force, capable of altering not just physical health, but the very essence of one's being. It wasn't just about influencing humors. It was about stripping away humanity itself, leaving only the primal, the predatory, under the stark, unforgiving light of the full moon. And as you pull your blanket even tighter, trying to ward off the chill, you can almost feel the wildness of the night pressing against your fragile walls, amplified by the silent, watchful eye of the moon. Having considered the terrifying possibility of lunar-induced transformation, your medieval mind now shifts to the practicalities of survival, specifically how the moon's silent power was believed to affect the very ground beneath your feet. For medieval farmers who lived and died by the success of their harvest, the moon wasn't just a celestial clock. It was a cosmic gardener, and its phases profoundly influenced how they approached gardening by moonlight. Imagine yourself stooping low in your small plot of land, the soil damp beneath your fingers. The sun has set, but the faint glow of the moon illuminates your work. You wouldn't just plant seeds haphazardly. Every decision, when to sow, when to weed, when to harvest, was often dictated by the moon's current phase, a practice rooted in generations of observation and deeply held belief. The idea was that the moon's subtle energies, the same ones that influence tides and humors, also exerted a powerful pull on the life force within plants. Specifically, the waxing moon, from new moon to full moon, was generally considered the best time for planting crops that grew above the ground, like grains, beans, or leafy vegetables. The logic was that as the moon grew in light and influence, it encouraged upward growth and vitality. It was seen as a period of increasing energy, drawing sap upwards, promoting lush foliage and abundant fruit. You might be out there, even by the dim moonlight, carefully placing seeds in the soil, believing you were aligning with the moon's powerful, generative force. It's like having a celestial green thumb, and you're just following its instructions. Conversely, the waning moon, from full moon to new moon, was believed to be the ideal time for planting root crops, like potatoes, carrots, or turnips, and also for tasks like pruning, weeding, or tilling the soil. As the moon receded, its energy was thought to draw downwards, concentrating growth and vitality below the surface. This was also considered a good time for harvesting, as the energy was supposedly drawn into the roots or fruits, making them richer and more flavorful, and less prone to spoilage. You might weed late into the evening, trusting that the waning moon would weaken the intrusive plants, making their removal more effective. A mainstream historical fact here is the ancient and enduring practice of lunar planting or moon gardening, which predates and continued throughout the medieval period. Records from various agricultural texts and monastic calendars show instructions for planting and harvesting according to specific moon phases. While modern science largely dismisses the direct influence of the moon's light, as opposed to its gravitational pull on tides, which is real but doesn't directly affect plant growth in this way, the traditional practice persisted for centuries, deeply ingrained in farming communities. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief that certain plants, particularly medicinal herbs, gathered under specific moon phases, possessed enhanced potency. For example, some traditions held that herbs for sleep or calming were best gathered during the waning moon, as its receding energy would draw out their sedative properties. Herbs for vitality or strength, however, might be sought during the waxing moon. So, Harvesting wasn't just about ripeness. It was about cosmic timing to maximize the plant's mystical or medicinal properties. It's like knowing exactly when to pick your basil for maximum pesto power, but with more mystical implications. Historians still argue whether the practice of moon gardening, despite its unproven direct efficacy, might have inadvertently led to more observant and disciplined farming practices, or if it simply added unnecessary layers of complexity and superstition to agricultural work. Did aligning with the moon encourage farmers to pay closer attention to natural cycles, thus leading to better yields through careful observation, or did it merely provide a pseudoscientific explanation for successes and failures, hindering a true understanding of soil science and plant biology? You, as a medieval farmer, would meticulously track the moon's phases, perhaps carving notches into a wooden stick or consulting a local almanac, if you were lucky enough to have access to one. Missing the optimal moon phase for planting could feel like a genuine agricultural disaster, a direct affront to the cosmic order that governed your livelihood. The success or failure of your entire year might feel dependent on your adherence to these lunar rules. Even beyond planting, other farm tasks were lunar timed. Cutting timber for building was sometimes done during specific moon phases, believed to make the wood stronger and more resistant to rot, tying into the moon decay fears from earlier, perhaps. Shearing sheep, brewing ale, even slaughtering animals, all could be influenced by the moon, ensuring the best quality product or preventing spoilage. So, as you look out at your small patch of earth under the silent watch of the moon, you realize that for the medieval farmer, the night sky was not just a source of light or fear. It was a vital agricultural calendar, a cosmic partner in the painstaking process of coaxing life from the soil. Every seed sown, every weed pulled, every harvest gathered, was a testament to the moon's enduring, pervasive power over the very rhythms of growth and sustenance. Having explored the moon's surprising role in agriculture, your medieval understanding deepens as you consider a connection far more intimate and universally observed: the perceived direct link between female cycles and the moon. For medieval people, the undeniable rhythm of the moon's phases, mirroring the approximately 29.5-day cycle from new moon to new moon, was seen as intrinsically tied to the menstrual cycle, a fundamental aspect of female physiology. This wasn't just a casual observation. It was often viewed as powerful evidence of the moon's profound influence on the human body, particularly on women. Imagine yourself as a medieval woman, acutely aware of the cycles of your own body. The moon, a constant presence in the night sky, waxes and wanes, seemingly breathing in and out, just as your own body experiences its monthly ebb and flow of vitality and fluid. It felt less like a coincidence and more like a cosmic blueprint, a direct connection established by the divine or by nature itself. The moon, as the mistress of waters and tides, naturally held sway over the most fluid aspect of female existence. It's like having your personal biological clock synced perfectly to a giant celestial grandfather clock. This belief was deeply rooted in humoral theory, too. The menstrual flow was often viewed as a natural purgation of excess humors, particularly blood, that needed to be regularly expelled for a woman's health. The moon, with its influence on bodily fluids, was seen as the prime mover in regulating this monthly cleansing. A woman's cycle that was irregular or absent might be attributed to a lunar imbalance or a lack of the moon's necessary pull. A mainstream historical fact here is that ancient and medieval medical texts frequently discuss the correlation between lunar phases and menstruation. Philosophers and physicians from antiquity onwards, including figures like Aristotle and later medieval scholars, noted this apparent synchronicity. While modern science has largely debunked a direct causal link between the moon's phases and the onset of menstruation for the majority of women, the historical belief was a cornerstone of understanding female health and reproduction for centuries. The observation of some women's cycles aligning with lunar phases was enough to cement the pervasive belief in a universal connection. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this is the idea that women conceived under specific moon phases would have children with particular temperaments or even genders. For example, some beliefs held that conception during a full moon, with its powerful, expansive energy, might lead to more robust male children, while a waning moon might favor females or more introspective personalities. So, the moon wasn't just influencing the mother, it was subtly shaping the very future of her offspring from conception. It's like picking out your baby's personality traits based on the lunar calendar, rather than just hoping for the best. Historians still argue whether the historical emphasis on the moon's influence on female cycles contributed to a greater societal awareness and acceptance of menstruation as a natural bodily process, or if it further reinforced patriarchal notions of female bodies being inherently more susceptible to external, even cosmic, forces, thus deeming them more fragile or irrational. Did it normalize a biological function, or did it subtly diminish female autonomy by tying their very being to external rhythms? You, as a woman in this era, would undoubtedly pay close attention to the moon. If your cycle began with the new moon, you might see yourself as inherently aligned with new beginnings and growth. If it was with the full moon, perhaps you felt a connection to powerful, vital energies. Any deviation might cause concern, leading you to seek remedies that would realign you with the lunar rhythm, perhaps specific herbs gathered under particular moon phases, or even rituals designed to invite the moon's regular influence back into your body. The moon's influence wasn't just on menstruation. It extended to fertility and childbirth. A full moon, with its perceived peak energy, was sometimes thought to be a time of increased births, or a more favorable time for conception. Midwives might even track lunar phases, anticipating a busier time during certain parts of the month. The moon was seen as a silent partner in the miracle of life, presiding over the intimate rhythms of creation. This deep symbolic and perceived physiological link highlights the medieval worldview where the microcosm, the human body, mirrored the macrocosm, the universe. The moon, a visible and powerful celestial body, was an undeniable force that spoke to the most fundamental aspects of female existence. And as the moon continues its silent journey above you, its constant rhythmic presence is a reminder of the ancient, powerful connection it held, and still subtly holds, over the perceived mysteries of the female body. Having explored the moon's intimate, often controlling relationship with female cycles, you might think its influence was solely detrimental or demanding. Yet, in the paradoxical tapestry of medieval belief, the moon wasn't always a malevolent force. Sometimes, in a curious reversal, people believed in moonbathing cures, where exposure to moonlight was thought to possess healing properties, particularly for specific ailments. This wasn't a universal panacea, but a nuanced, sometimes contradictory, aspect of their lunar lore. Imagine a sickly child, pale and frail, perhaps suffering from rickets or a skin affliction. Instead of shielding them from the moon, a desperate mother might carefully expose them to its soft, ambient light during the night. The belief was that for certain conditions, the moon's cool, damp essence, usually seen as harmful, could instead be curative, gently drawing out impurities or soothing inflamed humors. It's like being told the very thing that makes you sick can also make you better, which admittedly sounds a bit like some modern marketing for detox products. This paradoxical belief often stemmed from the idea of like cures like, or a perceived counter-effect. If daylight and heat were too harsh for a particular ailment, then the gentle, cool light of the moon might be just what was needed. Conditions associated with excessive heat or dryness, for example, might be thought to benefit from the moon's dampening influence. It was a subtle balancing act, where the key was not just exposure, but controlled exposure, understanding when the moon's nature would counteract rather than exacerbate an illness. A mainstream historical fact is the long-standing tradition of lunar rituals for healing and fertility in various ancient and folk traditions, which carried over into the medieval period. While not as formally documented in medical treatises as humoral theory or bloodletting, the practice of seeking lunar aid for specific ailments was common in local folk medicine. For instance, specific wells or springs believed to have healing properties were sometimes visited during certain moon phases, enhancing their curative power. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief in using dew collected under moonlight for medicinal purposes. This moon dew was thought to be particularly potent, imbued with the moon's gentle, healing essence, untainted by the sun's harshness. It might be used to wash affected eyes for improved vision, or applied to skin conditions, believing its unique properties could soothe and heal. So, instead of buying expensive eye drops, you'd be out there at dawn, carefully collecting droplets from leaves, hoping the moon had blessed them. Historians still argue whether these moonbathing cures were simply a desperate leap of faith in the absence of effective medical treatment, or if the ritualistic practice itself combined with the power of suggestion and some genuine environmental factors, like cooler nighttime temperatures for skin conditions, offered a degree of psychological comfort or even minor relief. Did these beliefs offer false hope? Or did they provide a crucial coping mechanism and perhaps even an accidental placebo effect for the suffering? You, witnessing this, would observe how your neighbors carefully positioned their sick chickens in moonlit clearings, or brought their feverish children out to lie under a pale, full moon, hoping for relief. There was an understanding that not all moonlight was equal. The light of a full moon might be used for general cleansing, while the gentle glow of a crescent moon might be sought for more specific, subtle healing. It was a testament to their adaptive thinking, trying to harness every available force for well-being. The paradox of the moon being both harmful and curative highlights the complex, often nonlinear, logic of medieval thought. They didn't have a singular, monolithic view of the moon. Rather, it was a multifaceted entity, capable of both ill and good, depending on context, intention, and the specific ailment. It wasn't about blindly fearing it, but about understanding its various manifestations and learning how to interpret its subtle language. So, as the moonlight filters softly into your room tonight, remember that for medieval people, it wasn't always a harbinger of doom. Sometimes, in their struggle against sickness and suffering, they looked to that very light, hoping it would bestow upon them, not lunacy or decay, but a quiet, lunar-blessed cure. It's a subtle shift in perspective, revealing the nuanced layers of belief. Having touched upon the surprising belief in moonbathing cures, your medieval sensibilities are now primed to appreciate that the moon's influence was often amplified by its nocturnal domain, the omnipresent fear of shadows of the night. In a world without artificial light beyond the flicker of a fire or a precious candle, true darkness was a palpable entity, and it was in this profound absence of light that lunar dangers and strange occurrences were believed to become most potent. Imagine stepping outside your humble dwelling on a moonless night. The darkness isn't just dim, it's absolute, suffocating. You can barely see your hand in front of your face. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, is magnified, transformed by your imagination into something potentially threatening. Now introduce the moon. Its light, while offering some visibility, also creates deep, distorted shadows, dancing, shifting shapes that play tricks on your eyes and prey on your deepest fears. These shadows weren't just the absence of light. They were believed to be places where the moon's malevolence could gather, where unseen entities might lurk, or where the moon's influence could more easily take hold of you. The very concept of night air was often imbued with harmful qualities, separate from but often exacerbated by the moon. This was a time when unseen vapors, miasmas, were thought to carry disease, and the moon, especially in its full, bright phases, was believed to draw these harmful vapors upwards, making the night air even more dangerous. So, you weren't just breathing air, you were breathing potential sickness, carried on moonlit currents. It's like believing your air conditioner is pumping out not just cool air, but also tiny, invisible gremlins that give you a headache. A mainstream historical fact reinforcing this is the common medieval practice of staying indoors after dark whenever possible. This wasn't just for safety from human bandits. It was equally, if not more, about protection from supernatural threats and perceived environmental dangers. Windows were shuttered, doors barred, and people generally avoided unnecessary travel after sunset, recognizing the heightened risks that the night, and especially the moon, brought. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief in moon shadows that could steal your luck or vitality. It was said that if your shadow fell in a particular way under the moon, or if a creature, animal or supernatural, passed through your moonlit shadow, it could drain your energy, cause you to stumble, or bring bad fortune. People might consciously avoid casting long shadows on certain nights, or step carefully to ensure their shadow didn't intersect with another, especially on nights when the moon was full and its power was at its peak. It's like a medieval game of hopscotch, but if you step on the wrong square, you lose your good vibes for a week. Historians still argue whether the medieval fear of darkness and night shadows was primarily a psychological response to a lack of light and increased vulnerability, or if it was a cultural construct deeply influenced by religious narratives of good versus evil and pagan beliefs in nocturnal spirits. Did the practical dangers of the dark simply get amplified by superstitious beliefs, or did the superstitions themselves shape people's perception of real danger? You, caught in the shadows of the night, would feel an amplified sense of dread whenever the moon was present. The very act of fetching water from the well after dark would be fraught with anxiety. Was that a trick of the moonlight in the corner of your eye, or something truly lurking? The rustle of leaves would become the stealthy approach of a phantom, and the distant hoot of an owl might be the ominous call of a nocturnal omen, all made more vivid and terrifying by the moon's spectral light. The absence of light meant that sight, your primary sense, was severely limited, forcing reliance on hearing and imagination. In such conditions, the mind easily conjured fears, and the moon, by providing just enough light to distort but not clarify, became a silent accomplice to this psychological torment. It created a world of half-glimpsed figures, of things that were almost there, always just beyond the edge of clear vision. This inherent fear of the dark and its amplification by the moon shows how intertwined the natural world and the supernatural were in the medieval mind. The moon wasn't just a light source. It was a character in the nightly drama, an active participant in creating an environment where strange beliefs about madness, decay, and transformation could flourish. And as you try to find comfort in your dimly lit room, the profound, unsettling silence of the medieval night, punctuated only by the occasional distant sound, makes you aware of how truly vulnerable you are when the shadows lengthen and the moon holds court. The lingering fear of unseen threats lurking in the moonlit shadows remains, but your immediate concern now returns to a more visceral, personal matter: that unexpected trickle of crimson from your nose. In the medieval period, where every bodily anomaly held significance, a spontaneous nosebleed wasn't just a sign. It demanded a response. And so, you delve into the world of folk remedies for bleeds, a collection of peculiar cures often steeped in superstition, desperate hope, and a dash of practical ingenuity. Imagine the scene. You've woken again with that familiar, alarming flow. Your family rushes in, not just with cloths, but with a range of strange, often baffling objects and incantations. There are no readily available pharmacies or sterile medical supplies. Instead, you're faced with a collection of local wisdom, passed down orally through generations, each remedy holding its own logic within the medieval worldview. It's like your grandma's advice, but instead of chicken soup, it involves rusty keys and chanted prayers. One of the most common and surprisingly persistent remedies was the application of something cold to the neck or back of the head. A cold key, specifically, was often pressed against the nape of the neck. The rationale, within their limited understanding, was that the cold would constrict the blood vessels and draw the blood downwards, away from the head where the bleed originated. While the constriction part holds some modern physiological truth, the specificity of a key often hinted at sympathetic magic, the key locking away the bleeding. Another widespread practice involved the use of astringent herbs or substances. Spider webs, for instance, were sometimes carefully applied to the nostril. While horrific to us, the fine silk of the web could act as a rudimentary scaffold for clotting, and perhaps the stickiness had a sealing effect. Other common applications included powdered herbs known for their drying properties, or even a paste made from certain barks. It's like having a very organic, slightly creepy first aid kit. A mainstream historical fact here is the significant role of folk medicine and local healers, often referred to as wise women or cunning folk, in medieval healthcare. For most common ailments, people relied on these community-based practitioners and their traditional remedies, rather than formally trained physicians who were often expensive and concentrated in urban centers. These remedies, including those for nosebleeds, were the practical, accessible healthcare for the majority of the population. A quirky or fringe tidbit for stopping nosebleeds was the practice of reciting specific incantations or prayers while holding the bleeding nostril. Sometimes, these incantations invoked saints, or even contained rhyming verses meant to charm the blood to stop flowing. The belief was that the words themselves held power, a spiritual force that could command the body's errant humors. So, you might hear your neighbor mumbling under their breath while pinching their nose, not because they're practicing a difficult spell, but because they're just trying to stop the flow. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these folk remedies was primarily due to a placebo effect and the body's natural healing capabilities, or if some genuinely contained empirically useful properties, like astringent herbs. Did the belief in magical cures simply offer false hope? Or did the collective faith in these practices often provide sufficient psychological comfort to aid recovery where modern medical intervention was impossible? You, with blood still trickling, would endure these strange ministrations with a blend of resignation and hope. Perhaps a small, blessed piece of cloth would be pressed to your nostril, or you might be told to look up at the sky and think of something pure, or to avoid looking at anything red. Every detail, however seemingly irrational, was part of a holistic attempt to counteract the internal imbalance that caused the bleed and the external influences, like the moon, that might have triggered it. The association with the moon remained, even in these remedies. If the nosebleed was particularly severe or recurring, and especially if it happened during a full moon, the remedies might be performed with greater urgency and with additional protective measures against lunar influence. Perhaps the cold key would be one that had been charged under sunlight during the day, a symbolic counter to the moon's coldness. These folk remedies highlight the medieval approach to health, a blend of observed effects, traditional knowledge, and a deep reliance on the spiritual and symbolic. While many of these practices would seem absurd to you now, for the medieval person, they were logical, meaningful actions in a world where the line between natural and supernatural was often blurred. And as the bleeding finally subsides, you feel not just relief, but a renewed awareness of the delicate balance of your body, always susceptible to the mysterious forces around you, even those emanating from the distant, pale moon. The peculiar remedies for your nosebleed now seem less strange when you consider that even the most learned men of the age, the physicians themselves, weren't immune to the moon's pervasive influence. Their practice of medicine, far from being purely empirical, was deeply entwined with physicians' lunar lore, a complex body of knowledge that integrated celestial observations with the delicate balance of the human body. Imagine a medieval physician, perhaps Master Thomas, examining you in his small study, lit by a single candle. He's not just feeling your pulse or observing your complexion. He's consulting his almanac or a prognosticatio, a type of medical calendar that would show the current phase of the moon, its position in the zodiac, and its conjunctions with other planets. For him, this wasn't just astrological curiosity. It was vital diagnostic information. He knew that the moon, the celestial pump, influenced all fluids within the body, including blood, phlegm, and even the subtle humors of the brain. He might explain to you that your current fever is aggravated because the moon is in a hot sign, or that your persistent cough is worse because the moon's dampness is increasing your phlegm. His decisions on when to administer a purge, when to attempt a surgical incision, or even when to gather specific herbs were all calibrated to the moon's celestial dance. This wasn't merely a suggestion. It was a fundamental pillar of medical treatment. It's like your doctor today checking the weather report before prescribing antibiotics. But instead of rain, it's a waxing gibbous moon. A mainstream historical fact here is the compulsory integration of astrology into medieval medical education and licensing. Universities like Bologna, Salerno, and later Paris and Oxford taught astrology as a necessary component for aspiring physicians. Graduates were expected to be proficient in casting horoscopes and understanding planetary influences, especially lunar ones, to properly diagnose and treat patients. To practice medicine without knowledge of the stars was often considered irresponsible, if not outright dangerous. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the concept of lunar critical days in diagnosis. Beyond just the general phase, some physicians believed that specific days in the lunar cycle, perhaps every 7th or 9th day after the new moon, were particularly prone to a crisis in an illness. If a patient was showing signs of recovery on a critical lunar day, it was seen as an exceptionally good omen, almost a cosmic confirmation of the cure. Conversely, a turn for the worse on such a day was profoundly concerning. It was like having a secret cosmic timer on your illness, set by the moon. Historians still argue whether the elaborate systems of astrological and lunar medicine, despite their ultimate scientific inaccuracy, fostered a sense of meticulous observation and systematic record-keeping among physicians, or if they ultimately diverted intellectual resources away from empirical research into physiology and disease pathology. Did the complex rules of lunar medicine encourage a holistic, though flawed, approach to the patient and their environment? Or did they act as a barrier to true scientific understanding? You, as a patient, would place immense trust in your physician's celestial knowledge. If he advised against bloodletting today because the moon was unfavorable, you would accept it, even if it meant prolonging your discomfort. You wouldn't question his judgment based on modern scientific principles, because those principles simply didn't exist. Instead, you would see his adherence to lunar lore as a sign of his wisdom, his connection to the grand order of the cosmos, and therefore, his superior ability to heal you. The moon's influence wasn't just about direct physical effects. It extended to the psychological and emotional states of patients. A physician might factor in the moon's position when assessing a patient's melancholy or anxiety, understanding these conditions as potentially amplified by lunar influences on the black bile. Treatments might then include not just herbs, but also recommendations for behavior and environmental adjustments during specific moon phases. This intricate web of belief meant that the physician's study was as much an observatory as it was a healing chamber. His instruments included not just scalpels and pestles, but also astrolabes and tables of planetary motions. For him, the moon was not just a distant light. It was a living, breathing entity, constantly interacting with the human body, and understanding its language was the key to unlocking the secrets of health and disease. And as the physician thoughtfully strokes his beard, contemplating the celestial sphere, you understand that your fate and his practice are inextricably linked to the silent, watchful eye of the moon. With the physician's lunar charts fresh in your mind, you might wonder how such pervasive beliefs squared with the dominant spiritual authority of the age. For medieval people, the Church's view on strange beliefs about the moon was a crucial, sometimes conflicting element. While the Church condemned outright paganism and witchcraft, its stance on natural phenomena and their perceived influences was often nuanced, allowing some lunar superstitions to coexist, or even be subtly absorbed into Christian cosmology. Imagine yourself attending Mass in a dimly lit, soaring cathedral. The priest speaks of God's divine order, of a universe created with purpose and design. Yet, outside, the very moon that illuminates the night is seen by many as a powerful, sometimes dangerous, entity. How did these two perspectives reconcile? The Church, while emphasizing divine providence, largely recognized a natural order established by God, within which celestial bodies exerted their influence. The challenge was distinguishing between natural, though misunderstood, influences and demonic ones. The Church generally condemned practices that directly invoked spirits or attempted to manipulate events through non-divine magic. However, the idea that the moon could affect health or the weather was often seen as part of God's created world, merely misunderstood by human intellect. As long as one didn't worship the moon or attribute independent will to it, its perceived effects could be discussed within a theological framework. It's like the Church saying, yes, gravity exists, but don't start praying to the apple that falls from the tree. A mainstream historical fact here is the Church's complex relationship with natural philosophy and early science. While the Church could be rigid in matters of dogma, it also fostered intellectual inquiry in monastic orders and universities. Scholars like Thomas Aquinas integrated Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology, creating a framework where natural laws, including the influence of celestial bodies, could be studied as part of God's design, provided they didn't contradict core theological tenets. This allowed for the study of astrology and lunar influences, as long as they didn't devolve into fatalism or sorcery. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the concept of the moon of the mad in some monastic writings, which suggested specific phases of the moon were indeed more likely to trigger madness, seen as a trial or a physical ailment rather than a demonic possession. Some monasteries, functioning as early asylums, might have noted the correlation and attributed it to a natural, albeit harmful, aspect of God's creation, rather than outright demonic influence. They might even say prayers for those afflicted during these specific lunar periods, trying to mitigate the moon's natural negative effects through divine intercession. It's like a priest admitting that bad weather can make you grumpy, but reminding you to pray for sunshine, not for the clouds to disappear by magic. Historians still argue whether the Church's tolerance, or even indirect acceptance, of certain lunar beliefs provided a crucial intellectual space for early observation of natural phenomena, or if its ultimate theological strictures stifled the development of truly independent scientific inquiry. Did the church's nuanced approach allow for a slow, incremental understanding of the natural world? Or did it merely ensure that scientific progress remained subservient to religious doctrine? You, as a devout medieval person, would navigate this carefully. You might use a moon-timed bloodletting but pray to God for its success, rather than to the moon itself. You might fear lunacy under the full moon but seek solace in the church's teachings that only God could truly control human fate. The fear of divine wrath for dabbling in forbidden magic was very real, so overt appeals to lunar power were generally avoided, or at least cloaked in a Christian veneer. The church also provided an alternative framework for understanding inexplicable events. If a crop failed despite moon-aligned planting, it might be attributed to divine punishment for sin, or the work of malevolent forces outside of the moon's natural influence, like demons or witches. This allowed for explanations that didn't contradict theological teachings, offering a different narrative for misfortune when lunar explanations fell short. Ultimately, the church's view created a complex interplay, acknowledging the moon's observable effects on the physical world, but always emphasizing God as the ultimate source of all power. It was a delicate balance, allowing for a popular understanding of lunar influence while striving to prevent it from becoming an object of worship or a tool for forbidden magic. And as the distant church bells chime the hour, you are reminded that even under the watchful eye of the moon, the divine order, however interpreted, was the ultimate arbiter of your medieval world. Having explored the delicate balance between lunar belief and the church's doctrines, your medieval consciousness now drifts inward, to the mysterious realm of sleep, and specifically to dreaming under the moon. For medieval people, dreams were not just random neurological firings. They were often seen as profound messages, omens, or even visitations. And the moon, with its ethereal glow and perceived influence over the mind's humors, played a significant role in how these nocturnal visions were interpreted. Imagine yourself lying awake, the moonlight painting ghostly patterns on your bedroom wall. You finally drift off, and your mind conjures vivid, unsettling images. In your modern world, you might consider stress, diet, or perhaps a scary movie as the cause. But in the medieval era, if these dreams occurred during a bright moonlit night, particularly under a full moon, the lunar influence would be immediately suspected. The moon was believed to directly affect the quality and meaning of your dreams, making them more vivid, more prophetic, or conversely, more disturbing and illusory. The medieval understanding of dreams often linked them to the humors. For example, dreams filled with fire and anger might be attributed to an excess of yellow bile, while melancholic dreams of darkness and despair could be linked to black bile. The moon, being cold and damp, was thought to either dampen fiery dreams or exacerbate watery, phlegmatic ones, potentially making nightmares more oppressive or visions more muddled. It was like the moon was a cosmic filter, coloring your dreamscape with its own particular hue. A mainstream historical fact is the pervasive practice of dream interpretation in medieval society, from the highest courts to the lowliest peasant huts. Dreams were considered valid sources of information, often believed to convey divine messages, warnings, or insights into the future. Dream manuals and treatises on prognostication through dreams were common, often categorizing dreams based on their content, the time of night they occurred, and yes, the phase of the moon. This was a serious endeavor, not mere folk superstition. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to dreaming under the moon was the belief that if you dreamt of something particularly vivid or prophetic under a full moon, you should immediately write it down or tell it to someone trustworthy upon waking, before the moon's influence faded. Some believed the moon's potent energy could make dreams stickier, more likely to come true, but also more fleeting if not quickly acknowledged. It's like having a limited time offer on your prophetic visions. Act fast or lose the cosmic intel. Historians still argue whether the medieval emphasis on dream interpretation, influenced by lunar and astrological beliefs, fostered a greater sense of self-reflection and introspection, or if it led to unnecessary anxiety and misinterpretation of normal sleep phenomena. Did this practice provide a valuable psychological outlet and a means of coping with an uncertain world, or did it merely perpetuate irrational fears and reliance on unsubstantiated omens? You, waking from a particularly unsettling dream after a night of bright moonlight, might immediately feel a chill of apprehension. Was it a warning? A vision sent by some unseen force, amplified by the moon's power? You might rush to consult a wise elder or a priest for their interpretation, carefully recounting the dream's details and the phase of the moon under which it occurred. The very act of recalling and discussing the dream became a ritual of understanding, a way to make sense of the moon's silent communication. Conversely, a pleasant or comforting dream under the gentle light of a crescent moon might be seen as a blessing, a sign of favorable lunar influence. Perhaps a dream of bountiful harvest after planting during the waxing moon, or a dream of healing after a moonbathing cure. The moon, in these instances, became a benevolent dream weaver, crafting visions of hope and reassurance. The subtle distinction between a truly prophetic dream and a moon-induced delusion was often difficult to make. A moonstruck dream might be considered a confused, unreliable vision, a symptom of lunar imbalance in the brain's humors, rather than a genuine message. This added another layer of complexity to dream interpretation, discerning the source and reliability of your nocturnal experiences. So, as you close your eyes, perhaps the lingering moonlight still visible through a crack in your shutters, you understand that for medieval people, even the realm of dreams was not untouched by the cosmos. The moon, a silent witness to your slumber, was thought to be actively participating in the tapestry of your subconscious, shaping your nightmares and perhaps, just perhaps, whispering secrets of the future into your sleeping mind. Having navigated the strange landscape of moon-influenced dreams, your medieval mind now grapples with a grander, yet equally intimate lunar power, the moon's pull on water. For you, the rhythmic ebb and flow of the tides are a scientifically understood phenomenon, a result of the moon's gravitational force. But for medieval people, without the benefit of Newtonian physics, this undeniable connection between the moon and the vast, moving bodies of water was a source of profound wonder and, more importantly, a key piece of evidence for the moon's influence on all fluids, including those within your own body. Imagine standing on a medieval coastline, watching the mighty ocean retreat and advance, precisely in sync with the moon's journey across the sky. The sheer scale of this phenomenon, the moon literally moving mountains of water, would be awe-inspiring and terrifying. If the moon could command the ocean with such undeniable power, surely it could command the relatively small amount of fluid contained within a human body. This simple, observable fact was often the primary justification for all other lunar medical beliefs. It's like seeing a giant magnet pick up a car and then assuming it can also perfectly align your internal organs. This fundamental observation formed the cornerstone of the medieval humoral theory's connection to the moon. If the moon influenced external water, it naturally influenced the internal waters of the body, the blood, phlegm, and other vital fluids. A full moon, drawing the tides high, was believed to draw the humors to the surface, making one feel more full, perhaps more prone to nosebleeds or a general sense of internal pressure. A new moon, associated with low tides, might suggest a more internal, quieter flow of humors. A mainstream historical fact here is that the understanding of lunar tides was an ancient observation, dating back to Greek and Roman times and clearly understood throughout the medieval period, even if the precise scientific explanation eluded them. Mariners and coastal communities structured their lives around the tides, providing tangible evidence of the moon's physical power. This direct, observable correlation between the moon and large bodies of water lent immense credibility to the less observable, but equally believed, influences on the human body. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to the moon's pull on water was the belief that water drawn from wells during specific moon phases possessed different qualities. Water collected during a full moon might be considered stronger or more vital for bathing, while water collected during a waning moon might be thought to have more cleansing or purging properties. Some even believed that rain falling under a particular moon phase carried unique healing or destructive attributes. So, your medieval thirst wasn't just about getting a drink. It was about getting a drink blessed or cursed by the current lunar alignment. Historians still argue whether the accurate observation of lunar tides, when combined with pre-scientific humoral theory, was a logical, if ultimately incorrect, step in trying to understand biological processes, or if it was an example of how a single, correctly observed phenomenon could be extrapolated to justify a vast array of unsubstantiated medical beliefs. Did the undeniable reality of tides legitimize the more fanciful claims, or did it simply provide a starting point for scientific inquiry that then veered off course? You, as a medieval person, would internalize this connection deeply. If you felt sluggish, you might imagine your internal fluids mimicking low tide, sluggish and slow. If you felt bloated or headachy, you might attribute it to your blood swelling like the high tide under a powerful full moon. The very notion of your body being a miniature ocean, susceptible to the same cosmic forces as the vast seas, would make the moon's influence feel incredibly intimate and profound. This understanding of the moon's pull extended beyond just the humors. It was sometimes connected to the very flow of sap in plants, as seen in moon gardening, and even the fermentation of liquids. Brewers might notice that their ale fermented differently depending on the moon, leading to practices of brewing only during certain phases to ensure a good batch. Everything that flowed or changed state seemed to dance to the moon's silent tune. The moon, therefore, was not just a symbol or an omen. It was a cosmic force, demonstrably exerting physical power on the largest bodies of water known to man. And if it could move oceans, then its subtle, pervasive influence on the delicate fluids within your own body became an undeniable, terrifying, and awe-inspiring truth of your medieval existence. As you listen to the quiet murmur of the night, you can almost feel the invisible tug of the distant moon, subtly influencing the very currents of life within you. Building upon the undeniable evidence of the moon's pull on the oceans and bodily fluids, your medieval understanding extends naturally to the plant world, specifically how the moon's cycles were believed to govern the efficacy of nature's pharmacy. You delve into the intricate connection between herbalism and moon phases, where the very potency of a medicinal plant was thought to depend on when it was gathered, dried, or prepared under the watchful eye of the moon. Imagine a wise woman, her hands gnarled from years of tending herbs, instructing you on how to gather belladonna or foxglove. She wouldn't just tell you what to pick, but when the moon, in its various phases, was seen as influencing the internal energies and medicinal virtues of plants, drawing their healing essence to their leaves, flowers, or roots at specific times. This wasn't just a matter of timing for ripeness. It was about cosmic timing for optimal potency, a deeply mystical aspect of their practical healing arts. It's like believing your vitamin C supplement is more effective if the oranges were picked on a Tuesday during a new moon. Specifically, herbs intended to purge or cleanse the body, often used as laxatives or emetics, were sometimes believed to be most effective if gathered during the waning moon. The logic here tied into the idea of the moon's receding energy aiding in expulsion and drawing things downwards. As the moon shrank, it was thought to encourage the plant's medicinal properties to similarly draw out illness from the body. Conversely, herbs meant to strengthen, nourish, or promote growth, such as tonics or remedies for fertility, were often favored for collection during the waxing moon. Just as the moon grew fuller and brighter, so too were the plant's vital energies believed to be at their peak, making them more potent for restorative purposes. You might wake before dawn, armed with a small knife and a basket, hurrying to snip the leaves of a particular herb, knowing that only at this precise lunar moment would it yield its full healing power. A mainstream historical fact here is the significant role of empirical observation and traditional knowledge in medieval herbalism. While formal medical texts existed, much of the practical knowledge of plant properties and their uses was passed down through oral traditions, often held by local healers, monks, and wise women. These traditions frequently incorporated astrological and lunar timings, as they sought to understand and harness every possible influence on the plants they relied upon for healing. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief that certain herbs meant for magical protection or divination had to be gathered specifically on a full moon, and sometimes even by moonlight, in order to imbue them with maximum power. These weren't just for healing. They were for warding off curses, finding lost objects, or seeing into the future. It's like a secret recipe, but instead of the right ingredients, it's about the right cosmic alignment for your mystical brew. Historians still argue whether the detailed practices of lunar herbalism led to a more profound respect for natural cycles and the subtle properties of plants, or if it introduced unnecessary complexity and pseudoscientific rationales that overshadowed true botanical understanding. Did it encourage a deeper connection to nature, or did it distract from more direct, repeatable empirical methods of discovering medicinal efficacy? You, seeking relief from an ailment, might be instructed by a healer to gather a specific herb only on a particular moon phase, lest its healing properties be diminished. You would meticulously follow these instructions, understanding that the moon's silent influence was as crucial to the herb's power as the soil it grew in or the sun that warmed it. The act of gathering became a ritual in itself, a careful dance with celestial energies. This practice wasn't just limited to gathering. Some texts also suggested that the preparation of remedies, grinding, steeping, or distilling, should also be timed according to lunar phases. A tincture started under a waxing moon might be considered more potent than one begun under a waning moon, for example. This added another layer of meticulous timing to the already complex process of medieval medicine. So, as the cool night air carries the scent of damp earth and distant forests, you gain a deeper appreciation for the medieval belief that even the smallest leaf, the most unassuming root, held a cosmic secret. The moon, a silent conductor in the orchestra of nature, pulled its hidden strings, dictating when and how the Earth's bounty could best serve humanity's ancient struggle against illness. Your healing, it seemed, was as much in the hands of the heavens as it was in the hands of the healer. Having explored the moon's intimate role in gathering medicinal herbs, your medieval consciousness now considers a broader defense against its perceived malevolence. How medieval settlements and structures were designed, in part, as architectural defenses to mitigate lunar exposure. This wasn't just about building sturdy walls against invaders. It was about shaping living spaces to protect against the subtle, insidious influence of the night sky, particularly the moon. Imagine the design of your own humble dwelling. It's not just a haphazard collection of timbers and thatch. The windows are small, often high up, and deeply recessed, unlike the large, expansive panes of glass you're used to. This wasn't solely for insulation or security against human threats. These constricted openings limited the ingress of direct moonlight, keeping the interior shrouded in a protective gloom after sunset. It's like your medieval home had built-in lunar blackout curtains, just without the curtains. The placement of sleeping areas was also strategic. Beds were often positioned away from windows or doors, in the darkest corners of a room, or even in separate, windowless sleeping alcoves. As discussed earlier, bed curtains and canopies were more than decorative. They were vital barriers against moonbeams believed to induce madness or illness. Every architectural choice, from the thickness of the walls to the orientation of the building, could be influenced by a desire to shield inhabitants from the moon's pervasive light. A mainstream historical fact here is the general construction style of medieval European homes and castles, which often featured small, deeply set windows. While defense against attack and heat retention were primary drivers, the fear of night air and harmful celestial influences, including those from the moon, also played a role. These multi-purpose design elements reflect a holistic approach to dwelling protection, where the intangible threats were as real as the tangible ones. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to architectural defenses was the belief that certain materials used in construction possessed inherent protective qualities against lunar influence. For example, some traditions held that specific types of wood, like oak or rowan, when used for beams or door frames, could repel lunar maladies. Iron nails driven into doorposts were also sometimes believed to offer a similar magical barrier. So, your medieval builder wasn't just concerned with structural integrity, they were also thinking about cosmic shielding. It's like selecting building materials based on their astrological sign. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of these architectural defenses, particularly against lunar influences, were simply rationalizations for existing practical building constraints, like the difficulty of producing large panes of glass, or if the widespread belief in these threats genuinely shaped and reinforced specific building practices over centuries. Did the fear of the moon lead to smaller windows, or did smaller windows simply lend themselves to a convenient narrative about moon protection? You, living in such a home, would feel a subtle sense of security as dusk falls and the moon begins its ascent. The thick, unyielding walls would feel like a literal shield, deflecting the insidious lunar rays. You might even participate in the ritualistic closing of shutters at nightfall, a deliberate act of sealing your dwelling against the external, unseen forces that the moon might bring. Beyond individual homes, the layout of entire settlements could be subtly influenced. While not as direct as home design, the placement of certain community structures or even the orientation of a village might consider prevailing winds, which could carry bad air, and the direction from which the moon's light would be most intense. Public spaces might be less exposed, Or features like watchtowers might double as vantage points to observe the moon's behavior, offering a warning system for the community. The constant vigilance against lunar exposure in architecture underscores the medieval conviction that the environment was not merely a backdrop to human life, but an active participant, capable of both fostering and undermining well-being. Every beam, every stone, every crack in the wall held potential significance in the silent, nightly battle against unseen forces. And as you settle into the protective embrace of your home, you understand that even the sturdy structure around you is a testament to the enduring power and fear of the moon. Even within the relative safety of your architecturally defended dwelling, the need for supplies or urgent news could compel you, or someone you knew, to venture out into the moonlit world. This brings us to the heightened risks and superstitions associated with travel by moonlight. For medieval people, night journeys were fraught with far more than just the usual dangers of rough terrain or bandits. They were periods of extreme vulnerability to the moon's perceived malevolent influences. Imagine stepping out from your well-shielded home into the vast, silent expanse of the medieval night. The only illumination is the pale, shifting light of the moon, casting long, distorted shadows that seem to dance with their own eerie life. The familiar path by day becomes a treacherous, unfamiliar route by night. But beyond the physical hazards, a profound psychological burden weighs on you. The knowledge that every step you take under the moon's gaze exposes you further to its power. It's like setting off on a cross-country trip with a known probability that your car will turn into a pumpkin halfway there. The moon, particularly when full and bright, was thought to intensify everything: the senses, the emotions, and crucially, the dangers. Travelers were believed to be more susceptible to lunacy if they stared too long at the full moon, or to moonsickness if its cold rays fell directly upon them for extended periods. The very air was thought to be heavier, more laden with harmful miasmas during these nocturnal expeditions. A mainstream historical fact here is the significant increase in dangers associated with medieval night travel, from actual bandits and wild animals to the practical difficulties of navigation without adequate light. While these tangible threats were very real, they were often amplified by the pervasive belief in supernatural dangers, including those tied to the moon, making night journeys something undertaken only out of dire necessity. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to moonlit travel was the belief in moon gates, or specific paths that were particularly vulnerable to lunar malevolence. These might be crossroads, ancient burial sites, or certain stretches of forest where the moon's light seemed to fall with unnatural intensity. Travelers would often try to avoid these specific locations during bright moonlit nights, even if it meant taking a longer, more arduous detour. Some might carry extra protective charms, or even say specific prayers, when passing through such supposedly cursed lunar pathways. It's like having a designated spooky lane on your commute home, and it's always busiest during the full moon. Historians still argue whether the strong cultural prescription against night travel, often reinforced by lunar superstitions, genuinely served a protective function by keeping people out of harm's way, both real and imagined, or if it merely limited mobility and economic activity after dark, contributing to the insular nature of medieval communities. Did the fear of the moon unintentionally save lives, or did it just make medieval life more restricted? You, on such a journey, would keep your eyes largely averted from the sky, pulling your cowl low. Every rustle in the bushes, every shift in the shadows, would trigger a surge of adrenaline. You might recite silent prayers, or clutch a small protective amulet hidden in your hand. The sounds of the night, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf, would seem amplified, taking on ominous tones under the moon's watchful, unsettling gaze. The vulnerability extended to one's sense of direction and awareness. It was believed that the moon could disorient travelers, leading them astray, causing them to lose their way in familiar territory. This wasn't just poor navigation. It was the moon actively confusing your mind, making paths appear where there were none, or hiding familiar landmarks. Such stories served as cautionary tales, reinforcing the dangers of tempting fate by traveling under the moon. So, as you imagine the long, lonely stretches of road winding through the medieval landscape, illuminated only by the pale, silent moon, you understand that these journeys were not just physical expeditions. They were psychological battles against unseen forces, against the pervasive fear that the very light guiding your way could also be leading you to your doom. striking you with madness or illness. In the medieval night, every step taken under the moon was a calculated risk against the cosmos itself. The dangers of moonlit travel underscore a deeper truth about the medieval world. The moon wasn't merely a celestial body. It was imbued with a profound, almost sentient power. You now turn your thoughts to the moon's mystical power, delving into the broader esoteric and magical beliefs tied to this luminous orb. This wasn't just about health or agriculture. It was about the moon as a conduit for unseen forces, a key player in rituals, divination, and the very fabric of the supernatural. Imagine a shadowy glade deep in the forest, perhaps on the night of a full moon. A figure, perhaps a solitary wise woman or a clandestine coven, stands bathed in its silver light. They aren't just observing the moon. They are harnessing its energy, believing its mystical vibrations can enhance their spells, empower their potions, or reveal hidden truths. The moon, in this context, was a cosmic battery, charging everything it touched with its unique, potent essence. It's like believing your phone charges faster if you hold it up to a giant disco ball in the sky. The moon's ever-changing phases were seen as representing different aspects of its mystical power. The new moon, hidden from sight, was often associated with beginnings, new ventures, or the planting of intentions. The waxing crescent was for growth and drawing things towards you, while the full moon, at its peak illumination, was considered the most powerful time for manifesting desires, performing protection spells, or engaging in acts of divination. The waning moon was for banishing, releasing, or cleansing. Every phase had its specific magical correspondence, a cosmic calendar for magical practitioners. A mainstream historical fact here is the significant role of folk magic and ritual practices throughout medieval Europe, often existing alongside, and sometimes intertwining with, Christian beliefs. While the Church largely condemned outright sorcery, many everyday practices, from blessing tools to warding off evil, incorporated elements of magical thinking. The moon, as a highly visible and cyclical celestial body, naturally became a focal point for these rituals, regardless of whether they were considered white, benevolent, or black, malevolent magic. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to the moon's mystical power was the belief in moon water charged specifically for magical purposes. Water left out under the full moon was believed to absorb its energy, becoming a potent ingredient for scrying, divination by looking into a reflective surface, anointing charms, or even for drinking to enhance intuition. This wasn't just for hydration. It was for spiritual absorption, literally drinking in the moon's mystical essence. It's like making special moon tea that promises cosmic insights, perhaps with a side of nosebleeds if you're not careful. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in the moon's mystical power provided a sense of agency and empowerment to people in a world where direct control over circumstances was limited, or if it fostered a dangerous reliance on irrational beliefs that could lead to harmful practices and social paranoia, e.g., witch trials. Did it offer a coping mechanism and a sense of connection to a larger cosmic order, or did it merely fuel superstition and fear? You, as a medieval person, might not openly engage in overt magical practices for fear of the church, but you would certainly be aware of them. You might quietly align your personal intentions with the moon's phases, perhaps beginning a new project on a new moon, or trying to let go of old grievances during a waning moon. Even if you didn't believe in direct spells, the underlying sense of cosmic rhythm permeated your understanding of the world. The moon's influence also extended to dream divination and prophetic visions. As discussed, dreams under the moon were thought to be particularly potent, often revealing glimpses of the future or insights into hidden truths. This wasn't just accidental. It was the moon, through its mystical power, opening a window to other realms. People might even perform specific rituals before bed on certain moonlit nights, hoping to invite prophetic dreams. Ultimately, the moon's mystical power represented a profound connection between the terrestrial and the celestial. It was a tangible link to forces beyond human comprehension, a visible manifestation of the magical undercurrents that permeated the medieval world. And as the moon shines down on Lang Son, Vietnam, this ancient belief in its potent, mystical energy still echoes through the quiet night, reminding you of a time when the sky wasn't just space, but a living, breathing entity woven with unseen threads of power. Having explored the moon's potent mystical power, your medieval journey now approaches a period of gradual, almost imperceptible, change. The superstitions surrounding the moon didn't vanish overnight. Instead, there was a slow, uneven process of the fading superstition as nascent scientific inquiry began to offer alternative explanations for phenomena previously attributed to lunar influence. This wasn't a sudden enlightenment, but a subtle shift, like the gradual turning of the tide. Imagine the quiet hum of a scholar's lamp, illuminating not just ancient texts, but also new observations. Slowly, painstakingly, figures like astronomers and early physicians began to question the direct causal links between the moon and every ailment or event. They weren't necessarily dismissing the moon's power entirely, but they were starting to look for other explanations to differentiate between correlation and causation. When a nosebleed occurred, perhaps the focus shifted from the moon's dampness to diet, or even simply a dry environment, even if the understanding was still incomplete. It's like discovering that your Wi-Fi problems might be due to your router placement, not just the phase of the moon. This shift was driven by increasing empirical observation and the development of more systematic scientific methodologies, however rudimentary. The invention of the printing press, for example, allowed for the wider dissemination of texts, including those that challenged traditional beliefs or presented new anatomical and astronomical findings. The work of Copernicus and Galileo, though much later than the heart of the medieval period, would eventually begin to dismantle the geocentric view of the universe, subtly undermining the astrological framework that gave the moon so much direct influence over earthly affairs. A mainstream historical fact here is the rise of the scientific revolution beginning roughly in the 16th and 17th centuries, which gradually chipped away at many long-held medieval beliefs, including those related to celestial influences on the human body. While astrology and lunar medicine persisted well into the early modern period, the intellectual currents were undeniably shifting towards more empirical and mechanistic explanations of the natural world. This wasn't a clean break, but a slow, often resisted evolution of thought. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this transitional period is the emergence of what might be called skeptical folk remedies against lunar influence. Instead of elaborate charms, some people might simply try more practical approaches if they observed no direct harm from moonlight, perhaps keeping a journal of their symptoms and the moon phase, trying to find correlations that weren't mystical. This informal, personal empiricism, however unscientific by modern standards, was a quiet sign of the changing times, a nascent form of critical thinking beginning to challenge ingrained belief. It's like conducting a mini experiment in your backyard, proving that your socks don't actually disappear when the moon is full. Historians still argue whether the slow decline of moon-related superstitions was primarily due to the undeniable advancements of scientific thought, or if it was also influenced by changing social structures, urbanization, where reliance on natural cycles became less immediate, and a growing emphasis on human agency over cosmic determinism. Was it simply a triumph of reason, or a complex interplay of intellectual, social, and cultural shifts? You, living through this transition, would witness the subtle tensions. Perhaps your elder neighbor still meticulously plants by the moon, while a younger, more educated artisan starts to scoff at such old wives' tales. You might see physicians still consulting lunar charts but also beginning to rely more heavily on anatomical studies or the observable effects of new medicines. The world around you would feel less rigidly governed by celestial dictate, offering a hint of greater freedom from unseen forces. The decline of the belief in specific lunar effects didn't mean the moon lost all its symbolic power. It remained a powerful metaphor for change, mystery, and femininity in art, literature, and poetry. But its direct, causal link to nosebleeds, madness, or food spoilage began to recede into the realm of folklore rather than accepted medical or agricultural science. So, as the silent centuries roll on, the profound, almost tyrannical grip of the moon on the medieval mind slowly, almost imperceptibly, begins to loosen. The fear doesn't vanish entirely, but it softens, becoming more of a lingering echo than a dominant force. The light of reason, however dim at first, begins to illuminate corners of understanding that were once shrouded in lunar mystery. Even as the sharp edges of medieval lunar superstitions faded, softened by the gradual advance of scientific understanding, their echoes resonate, subtle but persistent, in your modern world. This brings us to the final reflection. How faint echoes of these old beliefs persist even today. The moon might no longer be blamed for your nosebleed, but its mystical presence, its symbolic power, and even a hint of its ancient dread linger in language, culture, and surprising corners of contemporary thought. Imagine yourself now, back in your own time, scrolling through social media or listening to casual conversation. You might hear someone jokingly blame their erratic mood swings on the full moon, or refer to a whimsical person as lunatic, a word whose very origin is rooted in those medieval fears of lunar madness. These aren't serious medical diagnoses, of course, but the linguistic remnants are direct lineage from a time when the moon was genuinely feared for its psychological impact. It's like saying, "bless you," after a sneeze. You're not actually warding off demons, but the phrase itself is a whisper from a superstitious past. Beyond casual language, the moon retains a powerful symbolic hold. It is still associated with mystery, the subconscious, intuition, and the feminine in art, literature, and various spiritual practices. From poets waxing lyrical about the moon's silver gaze to modern self-help gurus advocating new moon intentions, the moon continues to be a potent archetype, even if its supposed physical effects are largely dismissed by mainstream science. A mainstream historical fact here is the continued popularity of astrology and lunar calendars in contemporary culture, particularly in areas related to personal well-being, gardening, and even beauty. While not endorsed by scientific institutions, millions of people worldwide consult astrological charts, plan activities around moon phases, e.g., planting by the moon, or even getting haircuts on specific lunar days for better growth, and interpret the moon's influence on their emotions. This demonstrates a persistent human desire for connection to cosmic rhythms, even in a highly scientific age. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to modern echoes is the surprising persistence of the belief, even among some medical professionals, that full moons correlate with increases in hospital admissions, emergency room visits, or even crime rates. While numerous scientific studies have largely debunked these correlations as mere coincidence or confirmation bias, the anecdotal evidence and folk belief remain surprisingly strong in these professions. It's like doctors having their own secret code for, "Get ready. It's a full moon. Things are about to get weird." Historians still argue whether the enduring appeal of lunar and astrological beliefs in modern times represents a failure of scientific literacy, a deep-seated human need for meaning and connection beyond the purely rational, or a subconscious continuation of ancient wisdom traditions that modern science simply hasn't fully explained or validated. Is it a harmless cultural artifact, or a sign of an underlying yearning for the mystical in a desacralized world? You, having journeyed through the medieval mind, can now see these modern echoes with fresh eyes. When you hear someone joke about moon madness, you understand the terrifying historical weight that phrase once carried. When you see a moon calendar for gardening at a local market, you recognize it as a direct descendant of practices once considered vital for survival. The casualness with which these ideas are now presented belies the profound fear and respect they once commanded. The moon itself remains, of course, a constant in the night sky over Lang Son, Vietnam, just as it did over medieval Europe. Its light is still beautiful, still mysterious, still capable of inspiring awe. But the meaning we project onto that light has profoundly changed. No longer is it an active agent of decay or madness. It is largely a passive observer, a scientific marvel, and a rich source of metaphor. Yet, a part of you, now familiar with the medieval worldview, might feel a slight, almost imperceptible shift when the full moon hangs bright and low. A whisper of ancient dread, a flicker of that old primal fear, might stir in the back of your mind. Because even though you know better, even though science has explained away so much, the sheer longevity and depth of these strange medieval beliefs leave their mark, a testament to the moon's enduring power over the human imagination. Now, as the long story of the moon and its medieval secrets draws to a close, feel the soft hum of your surroundings. The worries of old, the strange fears of moonlight and nosebleeds, recede into the vast quiet of history. You've walked through ancient villages, felt the chill of unseen influences, and pondered the vastness of the night sky through the eyes of those who came before. But that journey is done, and with its passing, Let the gentle stillness of the present moment envelop you. Your mind can release the anxieties of the past, letting them float away like wisps of mist in the dawn. There is only peace now, a quiet settling of thoughts. Breathe deeply, slowly. Feel the soft weight of your blanket, the steady rhythm of your breath. The world outside is calm, and so is the world within you. Let yourself drift, soft and safe, into the deepest, most tranquil rest.